Okay, y'all. Let's talk about, is Night of Champions canceled? I've been seeing a lot of rumors, a lot of talks about WWE canceling Night of Champions in Saudi Arabia due to the Iran, Israel, Donald Trump dropping bombs, just overall war. Now, Night of Champions is in Saudi Arabia. It is in that region where there is tension, but I don't think, Night of Champions is in danger. I don't think Night of Champions is going to get canceled. If you look on the map where Saudi Arabia is and where Night of Champions is located this year, it seems like it'll take a lot for Iran to, go ahead and try to do something to the Night of Champions event. And I don't think so. Also Iran, I'm not an Iran sympathizer, but Iran probably isn't worried about WWE and them having Night of Champions. I think that's so far from their mind. They're not even going that route. It seems like Iran, are attacking, I want to say military type things. Now, does a missile here and there, get misguided and, hit some population centers? Yeah. But Iran wouldn't be firing missiles into Saudi Arabia to kill a bunch of people to send a message. They're not going to do that. The biggest issue is terrorist groups. Iran as a whole, like as a country, isn't a terrorist, type country. They have 93 million people, and they have different cultures and stuff like that. But the government itself isn't trying to mass murder a stadium full of people. The terrorist groups that are in Iran, they might want to do something. But I think those terrorist groups, they don't have fighter jets, they don't have ballistic missiles, they don't have that kind of stuff. They are mainly just some guys maybe on motorcycles and stuff like that, maybe with some AK-47s, but if any of those terrorist groups tried anything, they would be really going out of their way to just mess with Night of Champions. And they're going to have a lot of security there. They might even have some Blackwater type security teams there to protect, the WWE wrestlers, on top of Saudi Arabia is going to pay buku money to keep them safe as well. So I don't think Night of Champions is going to get canceled anytime. A lot of fear mongering is going on the internet right now. Since Iran sent some missiles to Qatar, but that was a choreographed response. Iran told Qatar that they were going to do it, and they told a lot of the U.S. News media that they were going to do it in advance. They just wanted to do a retaliatory strike at the U.S. for doing something to them. It's kind of like, we punched them, but then, Iran told everyone, hey, we gonna do this, so be on the lookout. They wanted to just hit a specific embassy. They weren't looking for mass casualties type stuff. That's why I don't think Iran is gonna do anything to, Saudi Arabia. And, the U.S., when we did our little B-2 bomber thing, we didn't do any mass casualty stuff, like drop an atomic bomb or something like that. Like, we didn't do that. This was kind of like a friendly fade, except with war weapons and stuff. So honestly, I don't think we're gonna get too much out of this Iran and Israel stuff anymore. I think Trump, with those B-2 bombers, kind of was like, hey, we hit y'all don't want that smoke. And Iran said, okay, we got to do something back, or we going to look weak. Let us just shoot some missiles at Qatar and call it a day. I think it's done. I think it's over with. I honestly don't think we're going to get anything else out of that. This issue is really just between Iran and Israel at this point. I think the United States said you're not getting no nuclear weapons. They blew up the nuke sites. Well, the enriching uranium sites or whatever. The bunker buster bombs or whatever. They did that. And I think this is just an Israel and Iran thing. So the WWE should have no issues going into Saudi Arabia for Night of Champions. And that's on that. Y'all could do some more research. Just look at a map. It'll take a lot to actually go to Night of Champions as a terrorist to do some stuff. They not about to do that. Terrorist groups won't stand a chance trying to do something in Saudi Arabia with that short a time. They can't do it. They'll need a lot of manpower, and honestly, they can't do it. They can't ride a dirt bike, from Iran all the way to Saudi Arabia. It won't happen. So Night of Champions is still on until WWE says otherwise. They're going to Saudi Arabia for Night of Champions. If they did have to cancel it, if WWE had to cancel it, bring it to New Orleans. Give it to us. Bring us to New Orleans. We would love Night of Champions. Even though we lost WrestleMania, surprise us with that. But peace in the Middle East.